All right, welcome everyone. Please be aware that we are recording this session, as Zoom has just let you know. We have also enabled the live transcript for closed captioning, and you may find that option on the control bar that is usually at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I would like to extend the warmest welcome to you for the second event in our ASLE Contingent and Independent Scholar online speaker series. Today's topic is non-tenure track networking and professional development. I'm Kate Huber. I'm currently an assistant professor in the Department of Culture Studies at Tilburg University. And before this job, I worked as an independent scholar while teaching language arts in a rural public school in Oregon. And I'm currently a contingent scholar here in the Netherlands. From January 2023 to 2025, I have the honor of serving in the ASLE Executive Council as the Contingent and Independent Advocacy Officer. For those of you joining an ASLE event for the first time, a special welcome. We are so glad you have joined us today and invite you to help sustain and further our work by becoming an ASLE member if you're not already part of the association. ASLE acknowledges its office is located within Endokina, the ancestral and unceded homeland of the Abenaki people along the Quanatech and Ashwelot watersheds, and in the shadow of Mount Monadnock. We recognize that this land has been cared for by the Abenaki for at least 12,600 years, including by the Sokoke, Pennacook, and other Wabanaki peoples. ASLE offers a statement as a way of affirming its commitment to recognizing and supporting Native history and culture in the Monadnock region and all regions where our members and officers dwell, past, present, and future. ASLE's leadership is hosting this series for the first time. It aims to elevate the work of independent and contingent scholars whose work exceeds the boundaries of the academy and fosters connections between the environmental humanities and new audiences. These connections are increasingly important as humanities programs face budget cuts and contingency expands throughout higher education. We hope these events will offer new insights and inspiration for where we can take our research and activism in the future, asking many of the independent and contingent scholars in the ASLE community to help lead the way. By way of logistical information, we will ask that you remain on mute. And we'll have time for questions at the end of all the presentations. Please just post your questions to the chat. And please keep questions concise since we only have a brief hour together. So I will now introduce our speakers. So I'll introduce each speaker and then they will present. So our first speaker is Alison Turner. So Alison grew up in the mountains of Colorado, where she learned to endure large amounts of time in inclement weather waiting for buses. Her creative work appears in Blue Mesa Review, Word Runner e-chapbooks, and Little Patuxent Review, Meridian, and Bacopa Literary Review, among others. And her first collection of short stories, Defensible Spaces, was published by Torrey House Press in 2023. She is a 2022-2024 ACLS Leading Edge Postdoctoral Fellow in Jackson, Mississippi, where she coordinates a community-based oral history project and facilitates creative writing workshops with writers incarcerated at Parchman State Penitentiary. So looking forward to hearing from you, Alison, now.
Thank you. And then did we have those slides? Okay, I just have a few quick little visuals that I wanted to show you all. So thanks everyone for being here. I'm excited to join this discussion. That fellowship that Kate just mentioned recently ended, and a lot of that I think could be helpful to people in terms of methods, even if the topics are quite different from what ASLE folks are interested in. This fellowship was basically, the task was to do an oral history project. And I really knew it was important as an outsider to this community in Jackson, Mississippi, that it wasn't just myself doing these interviews. So I kind of designed what I called a community-based oral history method, which was committee-based. So I gathered people from within the community to learn how to do oral history, to learn about oral history, to learn methods, ethics, interviewing techniques, all the things. And then this committee of people interviewed their loved ones or strangers to them or their neighbors. And what came out of this was kind of an emphasis on process more so than product. And I think it was kind of a really cool way for me to experience how the skills I learned in academia during my PhD and research, kind of like theoretical research, could really uh, partner with community members as a form of community engaged scholarship, but also while working within this sort of house of a nonprofit, which is where I was placed. And so those pictures on the right are just sort of like little snapshots of what came out of that project. The top one is, it's an archived oral history project with 35 people who probably in more traditional projects wouldn't be involved in an archive project. So there are voices that often aren't sort of invited to speak into archives. That second one, History for the Holidays, was where the committee wanted to really emphasize the elders in the community. And so we did this kind of fun History for the Holidays project where people explained their holiday traditions and then were given a gift with a QR code linking to them describing that story. And then the last little snippet is just kind of a write-up about the project. And what was kind of cool about these that I learned and that I think others might consider is that each of these projects we were able to fund the committee members to compensate them for their time through micro grants. So I basically applied for a bunch of mini micro grants, a couple $1,000s each. And what I found was that at least in Jackson, Mississippi, these were not that hard to get. It was sort of like not a lot of people know about these mini grants and not a lot of people were going for them. And so I had never written grants before and I don't consider myself a grant writer, but it was sort of a process of building relationships and kind of working with the community, working with these grant organizations to kind of find a way to make these projects possible. And so I keep kind of like pitching these mini grant ideas to people who are kind of outside, one foot in, one foot out academia, because it's another way to really help your work. It's like a way to actually give flexibility and breadth to the work you're interested in doing. And if we might go to the next slide, please. Another part of this fellowship that was sort of, I mean, it wasn't like an official part of the fellowship, but this was me kind of pursuing interests and projects that are important to me while I was working in this nonprofit as a fellowship. What I learned also, in addition to the mini grants, was that when you're outside of academia, you can then partner with academics. And so suddenly when you're not the one in academia, you can reach out to people who are in academia and see if they can rally up funding or support from their department. And this ended up working really well for me in Jackson. I partnered with the chair of the English department at a private liberal arts college in Jackson. And what we did is this professor, and I didn't ask for permission to use his name or I would, lovely man, he and I partnered to basically he ran this visiting writers series and we were like, what if we kind of flipped it? Because usually the visiting writing series is on campus and there's certain boundaries of access. People, especially in this city, Jackson, there's literally a fence around this college. And so I think a lot of people who aren't community members of the college, like officially, feel a barrier to access. So we wanted to flip it. What if this writing series was outside of the college gates and it was more bringing writers who are already in the city together? So we did this in two different ways. That flyer on the left was a 3-part workshop series where local writers came in and did one-off workshops open to anyone on this theme of neighbors at a local coffee shop. And then that second middle one was an ongoing writing group we tried after, where anyone could come, and it was this writing group in the evening. Again, it was funded by the college, so the college I think everyone got a free drink and snack if you came and participated in the writing group, and they supported it, but it was open to anyone. So that was kind of interesting. And then that last lovely green cover was an anthology created by a fiction exchange between writers incarcerated at Parchman State Penitentiary and an adjunct class I did at that private college. So I kind of, like, for me, it was important. It was sort of like, I will teach this adjunct class if I get to do an exchange with the incarcerated writers, and they were open to that. So it kind of felt like I had, in a strange, ironic way, it almost felt like I had some leverage where I was invited to adjunct, and I sort of was in a position where I could say, only if you'll kind of invest in working with incarcerated writers and teaching and helping these students kind of learn and build relationships with incarcerated writers. So we did this anonymous exchange, and that cover there is just a picture of this final anthology with everyone's work in it. And then just on this last slide, this is all going fast, but I just wanted to also say that throughout all of this, I have been in a critical essay writing group since about 2019, which started during my PhD. And I'm very, very pro writing group. I sometimes identify as a writing group junkie because at any given time I have like 6 different writing groups going, and they're all different. But this critical essay one has been really, really important to me as I sort of leave academia and sometimes keep touching it and keep trying to do the work that's important to me, sometimes with and without academic support or support from the academy, so to speak. So these are just kind of fun little tips that I wanted to share with what has helped this writing group be successful if you wanted to start one. We found a balance of flexibility and accountability. Basically, like no shame if you can't make it, but if it's a night when someone's sharing work, that's probably a night you don't skip. And then we enjoy a wide definition for critical essay. So through, it's been about 5 years now. There's 4 of us in the group now. We sometimes are reading each other's job applications. We're sometimes reading kind of standard academic writing. We're sometimes reading like a critical apparatus, sometimes even a lyric essay. We're kind of letting the group do what they're interested in. Practicing openness to change. That's kind of self-explanatory. And then I'm really recommending you create a fun acronym from the names of participants in your group. And then you can use these for cheesy jokes and planning emails. So our current group right now pretty much gets to the acronym SALAD. It doesn't quite, but we stretched it. So we'll say silly things like, see you at the salad bar tonight at 5:30, or hello, my Franz, like, can't wait to see what toppings you brought tonight. And so it just keeps it fun and light. And I really do think that this writing group has really helped me. Like almost everything that I'm continuing to write and publish, even as I'm outside of academia. And this group has really just helped keep that energy and that curiosity going when you kind of are suddenly or not so suddenly removed a bit from, say, a formal academic setting. And that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alison. That was wonderful and really inspiring. I just love how many like ideas you have with like the microgrants and partnering with academics and just kind of flipping it that script a little bit. That was really cool. And hearing about your ongoing writing group also very inspiring because those can be hard to keep going. So yeah, it's good to I like the salad. So thank you for so much, Alison. I look forward to talking more about your work at the end. But now we'll hear from Anthony Lioi. So Anthony Lioi is a professor of English at the Juilliard School in New York, a former president of ASLI. He is the author of Nerd Ecology and many essays on contemporary American literature and popular culture. His scholarship centers on the fields of contemporary American literature, eco-criticism, cultural studies, and rhetoric and composition. He is also a published poet and sits on the editorial board of Green Letters and is co-editor of the journal Regeneration. Is that how it's yeah, regeneration, art, environment, art, and culture. I think it's new, right? Or like
It is new. It's a continuation of resilience, which
right,
is now
yeah.
folded, but as regeneration, it's new.
Nice. Yeah, no, so I'm excited to check that out. So looking forward to hearing from you now, Anthony.
Thanks, everybody. I'm going to start my timer. There we go. Got a stopwatch going. So first of all, I would like to thank officially all of the organizers because I find this kind of organization very challenging myself to do, and I really appreciate it when people put in that kind of labor on everyone's behalf. So I thought that in 10 minutes, like what I would do is give a little historical background to what I think is this problem, right, of contingency in non-tenure track faculty in eco-criticism and environmental humanities, and then just raise some questions that maybe we can talk about. So I wanted to begin by clarifying what it means, like for me to be in the kind of position I am, because there isn't entirely, I'm not satisfied with the kind of language we have for this. So I have rank, like to say it quickly, I have rank, but I don't have tenure or any kind of job security that would go with tenure, and actually relatively little protection in terms of academic freedom that traditionally goes with tenure, although now, of course, we're seeing the erosion of that in radical ways. So I'm in this kind of weird middle position where I'm definitely more secure than an adjunct. Um, and I'm in a system where I'm the most secure kind of faculty in my school, but but I don't have all the bells and whistles, right? I mean, so we don't, my position doesn't require research. And so there's no sabbatical, there's no money for travel and research and all that stuff. So in terms of like what we imagine when we imagine a secure tenure line tenured professor, right, I'm sort of way above the insecurity of an adjunct but below the security and the status of a truly tenured person in a kind of non-compromised position. um, so, having said that, I wanted to say, in thinking about this issue of how we, however we construe we, fit in, right, to this system and to ASLE, I just thought I would start out with a little bit of history because, like, ASLE started in 1992, and I went to graduate school in 1993. Um, and I knew I wanted to be an eco-critic, so like I'm one of the oldest people who could have done that. Um, and so, having first participated with ASLE as a graduate student, one of the things that attracted me to the group and to the discipline is that traditional academic hierarchies were relatively flattened. I mean, there was really, in the 90s especially, I think, this feeling of a kind of green anarchist anti-hierarchy, we're all peers here, relative to traditional academia, right? Like that it was very friendly, like no one refused to talk to anybody else because like you're a peon and I'm tenured, right? Like that just didn't happen in my experience, which I think actually is very important to my professional formation and the reason I actually stayed in the profession, because ASLE functioned as a kind of refuge to those other more hegemonic countercurrents of like shut up and know your place and be grateful in academia. So, having said that, like having said like ASLE and eco-criticism really seemed to be different to me in the way that it treated tenured, non-tenured, contingent, non-contingent, secure employment. I actually think that one of the challenges we're facing is the result of that positive anti-hierarchy, right? Which is, I don't think that we developed as a discipline or as a group a way of talking about why those differences may still matter, right? Especially outside of the bounds of ASLE and eco-criticism. And so likewise, there is an issue which I think is really the key to me of like how we can develop a way of thinking about imagining careers and not just jobs. Because I think that one of the great hierarchical splits between tenured and non-tenured contingent faculty is that tenured people get to have careers and contingent people get to have jobs, right? And if you don't have tenure and you're never going to have tenure, then the question of like what is the arc of that career, like how are we imagining ourselves, is really up in the air, right? Especially now when even the hierarchies are going crazy. Um, so so I think that that's one of the major things that I would hope we could consider, like how do we imagine ourselves differently but productively, especially for people who are coming up in the discipline and in the organization who are way less secure even than we were, right? With an even worse job market, right? So what about that? So before I offer like my series of nested questions, I just want to say one of the things that I think is really important about ASLI as a group is that non-tenured people have actually had, in my estimation, an outsized influence on the group and the way it works. And I hope that I didn't actually ask permission to say this, so I hope nobody minds. But I just wanted to point out 3 different examples. So my first one is Stephen Rust, who is an instructor at a university. And Stephen is like one of the founding people who made eco-media, right, a thing in environmental humanities and eco-criticism, right? So like he's a very influential organizer and theorist and researcher. But you know, his technical, he's a non-tenured instructor, presumably on rolling contracts. Another person who is more like in my situation is Carla Armbruster, right, who is a non-tenured but permanent faculty member at a university. You know, and for those of you who don't know Carla, Carla is one of the great institutional memories of ASLI. I mean, I don't understand how we could function without her in many ways. And you know, and she's also an influential researcher and critic, right? So she too has had, she does things that are associated with tenure line activity without tenure, right? And Amy, I hope you don't mind me pointing to you at this point, right? Because I actually think your example is extremely important, because I think that you operate as de facto, I mean, not only the institutional memory, but the organizational superstructure of the entire group. You know, and that involves, right, you know, like being an academic in a way that is not defined as being a professor, right? And I just wanted to acknowledge that, like, I just can't imagine ASLI minus all 3 of those people, right? And so I guess Amy can tell me what she thinks of that after I'm done. Anyway, so having said that, like, so we as a group, right, have always had a flattened hierarchy. I'll say that that way, and we've also had very influential non-tenure track members, and I think that like developing language to talk about that is related to developing the idea of what a career arc could be for non-tenure track people, and so the to end, right, the nested or related questions that I have are: one, like how should we understand this history in our own terms, which includes the question of how should we speak of each other, right, and ourselves, uh, right, when especially at a moment in academia when all of these sort of stable terms are being thrown into question, and more people uh, are contingent in reality than appear to be contingent by their title or their role, um, and when you know tenure track lines or gaining tenure does not protect you the way it theoretically did 20 years ago. So there's that. And so my more pointed question is, you know, having talked about that, then like, is there something that we want ASLI to do, right? Is there something that we ourselves can do in our own organization to answer these questions? Um, you know, and is there actually a real difference between the way one would answer these questions inside ASLI or inside eco-criticism or EH, um, versus outside our fields, right, in general? And I'll connect that finally to the question that's already been raised about like, what do we do about all of this and say about all of this, right, in a moment when like traditional academic protections are being destroyed in multiple ways. And when ironically, right, to me, like my experience of this is the world is turning upside down because friends of mine who were tenured have lost their jobs, right, as easily as I could lose my job, right, and yet I still have my job and they don't, right, which is really like producing a kind of psychic whiplash. Like weirdly, I seem to be more secure in some ways than they do, or that they were. Um, so, you know, so that was really the cluster of questions that I wanted to throw out. And finally, I'll just say, if anybody wants to organize a special issue or write an essay about this, focusing on environmental humanities or eco-criticism or related fields, eco-poetry, creative writing, right? Regeneration as a journal would welcome those proposals. So there's a little plug for Regeneration. Thank you.
Fantastic, Anthony. That was like fascinating and really thought-provoking and inspiring. I know we want to have questions at the end, but I also want to open it up just in case anyone wants to respond now to any of Anthony's questions that he shared just now.
If I may, very interesting questions that you raised, questions that I've definitely thought about myself as I'm almost getting close to completing my PhD and looking at what's next. Considering how tenure is eroding, how there's less stability in hiring, one of the questions I'm also thinking about a lot is what this means for future departments, because in the past, tenure track, they're the ones who set the tone. They're the ones who create the vision for what kind of programs, what kind of classes, what are we going to discuss in our departments, what courses will we offer our students. And, you know, if you're just on a contract, you don't have that same kind of power. You also don't know if you're going to have a contract, so you're not going to invest in the same way in an department or institution. So I wonder if these kind of questions are being thought about at all at administrative levels. I'm coming also from the context of Canada, where recently a lot more, and I'm in Spanish, and a lot more graduate programs have been shut down over the last few months in quick succession. And so then my question also is like, what does this mean for the survival of associations as well? Because while, of course, you know, as contingent scholars, we would love to continue contributing to associations and continue to be part of the conversation, there's also the reality of just having our 9-to-5 jobs. And in my case, you probably saw my daughter wandering through, having a family. So, you know, I'm just raising a lot of questions here. But anyway, thank you. And
Thank you for that. I mean, all of those questions are bothering me too. I'm assuming that we're not going to go into full discussion mode yet.
Yeah, I think, no, those were really great questions, Adriana. Thank you for sharing those as well. Just so that we have time for all the speakers, maybe we can move on now, but certainly there's a lot to come back to at the end, so I'm excited for the discussion. But I do want to now introduce Ellie Irons, who is an artist, scholar, and educator living and working on Mohican land in current-day Troy, New York. In December 2021, Ellie completed a practice-based PhD at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and focused on forms of eco-social art that cultivate plant-human solidarity. Currently, she works as a community science educator and lab manager for Nature Lab at the Sanctuary for Independent Media. And her most recent publication is the book Feral Hues, A Guide to Painting with Weeds. So I'm excited to hear from you as well, Ellie. Maybe some questions about plant and academic sort of collaborations can come up too. So
totally, yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for organizing this. And I feel like I'm like the farthest out of the orbit of academia in some ways, but I keep getting pulled back in. So I always appreciate the invitation. And, you know, I work at a nonprofit. And so I think often about how reliant mine and many others are on the kinds of institutional support that we can pull from universities and from academia. So that's always on my mind. And I'll touch on it a little bit. I'm talking to you from current day Troy on Mohican land in New York City or north of New York City. I was just looking for my timer and I'm realizing it's probably not showing up. So I'm going to set, I don't want to go too long. So I'm going to set 10-minute for myself. And then that'll help me wrap up in a timely fashion. You see my slides though, right? Like the community science slide. Sweet. I don't know where the timer is. Who knows? Yeah, so I'm about 3 hours south of New York City, and some of this talk draws on my dissertation work at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. So I finished that practice-based PhD there in 2021, a while back at this point. And I continue to have one foot in academia. I teach part-time occasionally, and like I said, I work for this small nonprofit doing a lot of land-based education and community science work that incorporates interdisciplinary art and land tending. And I call this this talk Eco-Social Art, Community Science, and Plant-Human Solidarity, which is this broad range of topics strung together, but they're all entangled in how, like, my, if you want to call it a day job, and my research and artistic practice and then ongoing scholarship mixed together. So a bit of this is like a standard artist talk, and then hopefully I'll breeze through that and get to some ways that art and scholarship come together for me. So as an artist and educator, I practice what I think of as eco-social art. This is a form of interdisciplinary artistic practice that combines ecological art and socially engaged art through a multi-species lens, meaning it engages with more than human life and land as active partners, and then also takes social engagement and interaction as a primary artistic method. So I use a lot of walks and workshops and participatory events alongside more traditional artistic techniques like painting and drawing, video, sculpture. And I create work that's aimed at trying to understand and live with the ecological and the social as entangled. Certainly a lot of environmental humanities and ASLE type research informs this practice. And I've been doing this, more than a decade. I started kind of getting into it in earnest when I started working with weedy plants to make watercolor paints. We may get to that a little bit later, but it's one of the core practices that has kind of informed this work. And since I started doing that work, painting with weeds, about more than a decade ago, I've started thinking about forms of eco-social art that cultivate plant-human solidarity. Plants have taught me a ton. And so I'm building on that as I work. And I think of this teaching and learning with and from plants as a kind of phytocentric pedagogy. It's one way to build cross-species allyship. With many others are working in this frame. I'm super grateful for that. This kind of understanding this is essential to the future of an increasingly urban human population that's navigating climate chaos and its associated injustices. I'm going to hop through some of these slides just so that we can get to a little bit of the research. But I do want to acknowledge that I think of plants as potentially conspiratorial beings in this weedy context that I can work with in the sense described by artist and anthropologist Natasha Myers as co-conspirators to lessen the harms of our compromised times. That's a phrasing from feminist philosopher Alexis Shotwell. I work with this particular plant to make a beautiful magenta paint and in a lot of other ways. And along with a whole collective of folks that I've been working with over the past 7 or 8 years, I've been working to reclaim the term weedy from derogatory associations. This has grown out of hands-on collaborative work in habitats that are often overlooked as sites of natural cultural value, like this car repair yard turned urban weeds garden. This was the headquarters of my artist collective, the Environmental Performance Agency, in 2017. And these disturbed habitats can also include like an urban sidewalk or a street with the fragmented plant communities and their soil locked away underneath streets, or the intensively managed greenery of monocultural lawns like the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Each of these habitats are land that has been damaged by the extractive pressures of capitalism and settler colonialism. These are ecocidal systems that we can recognize we're all complicit in. And following Potawatomi writer and plant biologist Robin Wall Kimmerer, these weedy plants, whether they're native or naturalized, rebuild and repair damaged land, preparing the way for recovery. And we've got this little tiny weedy tree there that would like to be a full-grown forest, probably a honey locust. And the arc of this research and experimentation has led to some ongoing projects like the Lawn Redisturbance Laboratory, over the past 6 years or so, alongside my core collaborator, Anne Percoco. We've removed roughly 1,000, probably more like 1,500 pounds of turf at this point to make collaborative sculptures with communities of humans and plants. Maybe we'll get a little bit more to Lawn Lab later, or we will. I noticed Aubrey was on this call and we've done a little collaborative work around that. I'm gonna pop forward a little bit further through this artist talk aspect. I do want to remind us all to pause, acknowledging that many of these connections to plants and modes of learning with plants come out of Indigenous cultures and histories, particularly where I live, the Mohican and Haudenosaunee traditions, for generations and generations have seen plants as teachers and as guides. And I want to acknowledge that and appreciate that as, you know, my subjectivity as a settler, bringing appreciation for that. I'm just going to pause and breathe with that. Gratitude for those traditions that have been managed to be handed down over time. And I'd invite you to also take a moment to be in your body. Thanks for doing that. I try to work these pauses into my scholarship and my work as much as possible because of the frenetic nature of being contingent or tenured. Causes us to not be in our bodies often. And many of my collaborators, from plants to people who practice somatics, have taught me how much better I function when I breathe. So I'll jump into some ways I've stayed engaged with the Academy while also working outside, away from and at its margins. So my day job is at the Sanctuary for Independent Media. We're a nonprofit based in North Central Troy and one of the poorest census tracts in New York State, right at the base of the Erie Canal. So we've got a lot of industrial, post-industrial extraction and all the environmental ills that come along with that, but also an amazing set of resources and histories and community to work with. We describe our multifaceted work with this complex slogan. We're a sprawling organization, so we do manage to do most of it most of the time. We use art, science, and participatory action to promote social and environmental justice and freedom of creative expression. We started as an independent media org 20 years ago, but now we have a broad social and environmental justice mission and have a whole environmental campus we think of as a learning and living laboratory. We've got a food forest and outdoor performance venue, a pollinator and fiber garden, a biocultural food, medicine, and biodiversity garden. So we're cultivating a lot of green space in a post-industrial landscape. And this leads to all sorts of questions around health and safety and how ecosystems are functioning. So we have Nature Lab, which is a rehab previously abandoned building that we got a big Department of Environmental Conservation grant for, and lots of volunteer help. So we do DIY community science there, studying air, water, and soil of our hyperlocal environment. And then to bring folks into engagement with the campus as a whole, we've developed our Eco Art Trail, which was an NEA Our Town funded project with a lot of collaboration with RPI also. It's been a joy and a major task to work on. It was also developed in partnership with the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohican Indians. And it includes their living legacy on the land in the way that they're wanting it to be framed. So we have these media QR codes across campus for interviews and videos. And then we also commissioned living artworks and sculptures where we embed art, culture, ecology, and history into this urban nature walk that we invite people to do either virtually or in person on their own time or through a tour. So curatorial projects like this arise alongside other collaborative work that sometimes leads to more traditional publications. So this ongoing collaboration with the Land Institute, shout out to Aubrey, who collaborated with me on this. This also relies on the sanctuary as an institution and the Next Epoch Seed Library. So it's this unlawning project that we've been working on for about 4 years. And that was my 10-minute timer. I'd framed this more to be like 15, but I'm game to like leave lots of room for discussion if that's preferable to people. Should I keep rolling?
Yeah, I think you can finish your presentation.
Cool. Yeah, I think I can wrap up in the next couple minutes. So historically, this was a lawn, just a default mowed by the landowner, and it now hosts an experimental crop of silphium. I do think of it as a living sculpture in collaboration with plants, but also a civic science project. So this is a wild prairie sunflower that the Land Institute sent to me. I can talk more about the logic of the experiment if that's interesting to people. But the Land Institute is based in Salina, Kansas, and they're breeding this sunflower for potential perennial and sustainable oilseed production. And out of this years-long civic science experiment that I've been involved in, which is embedded in this land-based art project, came this collaborative article. And the kind of process of writing this with Aubrey Street-Krug, who was, I can't see you now, Aubrey, but I think you were on the call, who's trained in literary analysis and eco-criticism, gave me the chance to investigate how embodied knowledge and hyper-local context is relevant to my civic science research, which is something I never would have attempted on my own. So for me, the collaborative nature of publishing scholarly articles has been huge, and has allowed me to kind of like learn that system and have institutional support to do it. I also was able to work with another collaborator of mine who has his foot in academia. He's an artist, but also works for the New School's Urban Systems Lab. And we worked together to think in a more meta way about how some of the community practice I'm engaged in relates to nature-based solutions, a kind of framework within the sciences. And another way I've had things evolve is kind of on parallel tracks. So I'm working on like a scholarly version of something and a more art practice driven version, and they inform each other. And that's what happened here with this article and handbook. So I was exploring my decade-long practice with making weedy watercolor paints from spontaneous urban plants and teaching others how to do the same. And both publications cover related territory, but in disparate ways with distinct framing and audiences in mind. So the book's like part instruction manual, part field guide, and part ode to weedy plants. It covers some of the theoretical territory that I dealt with in my dissertation, but it's also hands-on and practice-driven. And the article, of course, is a lot more explicit about theoretical legacies and scholarly positioning. And one more, of course, I did the article for free. I was like, offered to do it without paying due to my contingent or like lack of any affiliation, but I didn't get paid to do it. Versus because I was able to frame the book as an art project, I got grant funding, and now it makes money when I sell it. So I'm, it's always thinking about like, as someone who's interested and really benefits from doing scholarly work, like what am I willing to invest in terms of time and how much help do I need navigating all this stuff, the kind of bureaucracy that maybe being part of an academic department might help me navigate better. I know it's hard for people who are in an academic department as well. But the scholarly writing does really help me understand and digest and frame why I do what I do. So even when I sometimes cringe when I get the chance to write a scholarly paper because it's so hard and it takes a good chunk of investment, I also know that it's going to be rewarding. And this tending and being tended framework is super important to me and wouldn't have come about without working with someone who was a securely tenured chair at a university and invited me to do the paper and then walked me through and taught me how to write a scientifically framed paper and, got it into this framework. So I think, that kind of wraps it up for me, but the kind of mode of working with academia from the outside and with institutions, I so value what I'm able to draw out of academia, but I also understand the kind of the state that folks that are working in the academy are in, which is more and more support getting stripped away, and it being both like them really wanting to work outside of the bounds of the academy, but also having maybe less resources to do so as they're asked to do more and more within the place they're at. So there's some sources. That's it. Thank you for the little bit of extra time.
Thank you so much, Ellie. That was fantastic. I love how you kind of built on the Alison and Anthony's talks, thinking about multi-species networks, as well as we work towards a discussion about how to sort of think of the academy and work in environmental humanities, eco-criticism in particular, as these different sort of institutional supports fall away in our current moment. So thanks so much for that. We just have one last speaker, Juliana Chow, who I will now introduce, and then after we will have discussion. So Juliana is a diasporic writer, educator, scholar, and mother, and she currently teaches at the University of Utah and directs the Ecology and Legacy minor at the Honors College, and has published academic and creative writing. And Juliana is also the ASLI Mentoring Program Coordinator. So welcome, Juliana. Thank you so much for being here today. It's exactly.
Hey, yeah, I'm here because Kate invited me to be here, and it's really wonderful to hear about what people have been working on. Ellie, your project sounds amazing, and if you are ever in Salt Lake City, please let me know so I can ask you to come see my students. But I wanted to there's only a few minutes left, so I'll just talk a little bit about, resources for all of us here that I don't think have been sort of announced yet in a recent newsletter, but that are, I think, good resources for a lot of us who are in either contingent or feeling like tenuously connected to academia. And so I've stepped in as a co-coordinator of the ASLI Mentored Program basically at the end of last spring. And the mentorship program is pretty open-ended. Anyone who is looking for a mentor can basically go to the ASLI website. And it's under I think the Join Us, and if then you look under the menu bar under student, it's not just for students though, it says explicitly for students and early career scholars. You can click on that and fill out a form to be connected to myself and also Megan Kaminsky, who's co-coordinating with me. And then we help you find a mentor. And so, a lot of what people have talked about is like, how do we keep ourselves going when you're either tenuously connected to academia or sort of not in it? And I think to say a little bit about why I decided to step into this co-coordinator position, it was because I was in that position of being tenuously connected, and then but in a weird way, meaning that I had a tenure track position and I voluntarily left it because I felt for many reasons, but one of them was just kind of disenchantment with academia, I guess. And then realizing and thinking about, that distinction that Anthony brought up between job and career. I needed a job. And so I came back, and I'm actually in a very similar position as Anthony, where I'm a career line instructor. And so, but I had to face the question of like, how do I keep myself going? And what do I want to contribute? And so I think ASLI was an amazing organization that I participated in, primarily as, a graduate student and as an academic. And I wanted to be able to provide mentorship for people. And so some of my questions that I'd be interested in hearing from people are, on one hand, it is wonderful that we have this mentorship program. And as someone who just stepped in, I don't know how successful it has been, but I'm also curious to know like what else people want from a mentorship program, like what would help them. And as someone who's been trying to keep going, I think the distinction for me between the job and the career aspect is the research part, is the project that you get to do. And because I don't have that requirement, right, in my job anymore. That falls by the wayside a lot because I'm busy. I've got kids, I've got other things, and those all kind of pile up before I start thinking about my own creative or academic scholarly work. And so I wonder what we could do in the mentorship program, maybe teaming up with contingent faculty, sort of program at ASLE, and think together about what kind of work a mentoring program could do to help people keep going. And think expansively, obviously, about, how we do scholarly work or creative work. Because I think that academia is definitely a wonderful home for it, but as many of you, I think, show, it's not the only home for it.
Yeah, thank you, Juliana. I think that's I loved your ideas about also like a mentor network rather than like a single point person. And I'm curious just kind of to hear the conversation, how that goes also with some of the questions that Anthony raised about rethinking like what academics look like and what academic work looks like. So yeah, I don't want to by any means dominate the conversation, so I'd love to just hear what folks' thoughts are. If there are any questions in the chat, I don't know. Haven't checked. No, it seems. Are there any questions from the folks in the room before? No? Okay. Yeah, because I am just. Oh yeah, go ahead, Julian.
Well, my question for folks is, would they want to see a mentoring program? But right now, our method is that if you're interested, you just fill out the form and then we'll work with you to find a mentor. And I'm curious if people are interested in other models. We also hold mixers and socials and sort of like more temporary meetups at the conference. But there are other programs, mentoring programs for people organize a more like formal mentoring partnership that kind of happens and is organized around a conference. So the people that go actually meet and speak to their mentor or meet their mentee at the conference and maybe have more formal guidelines for what they do. And so I would love to hear if people have ideas or things that they feel like have worked for them.
Yeah, thank you. I think that could be great. And we can also combine with some of the questions maybe Anthony posed and some of the comments that Adriana had earlier. So we can just really open up the floor to maybe thinking these things together, because I feel like there's a lot of overlap also with the way that research is in fact devalued in career instructor positions and where there's something Ellie said at the end where she's doing kind of free labor, writing an academic article, and just really thinking about what is it to do this labor? What does it look like? You have, as Anthony pointed out, people like Steve Russ doing incredible work while juggling insane teaching loads. So yeah, just kind of I think there's a lot of overlap here. So I just I think that's what that looks like could be really looking for mentors from all different spaces and places. But yeah, I hope I'm not like diluting the conversation. I'm trying to open it up to other folks too.
I mean, I can jump in with something that's bothering me, aside from all the other things. In terms of the mentoring program, which I think has been very, very valuable, and like thanks to everyone who's doing that work. The thing that I know many people on the tenure track who teach graduate students are worrying about is, and I like to be clear, I don't have grad students or majors. so this is not exactly my question, except it is everybody's question, is to what extent should the mentoring program, if the student is a graduate student in a traditional academic program, like have a hand in explaining how bad things are, right? Because the few times I've had the opportunity to say to an undergraduate who's thinking of going into literary studies for graduate school, like I've just said, don't, right? Like, unless you understand exactly how tenuous the possibilities are, right? It's not even, like I said, it's not even ethical for me to recommend it because the hope for what is thought of as a traditional job is so bad, is so low. And then they look at me and they're like, oh yeah, like 10 other people just said that to me too, you know, but I'm just wondering what the ethical dimension of mentoring is in this context.
In my program, they hold sessions where they encourage alt academia positions, and they try and give us some idea of what we can do. In my context, I'm in Ottawa, and so there are a lot of government jobs. So that's what a lot of us end up doing. We end up working for government, which with the new prime minister might get cut. So might get some hack job in there. But anyway, I mean, there are some graduate programs where they do try and help you navigate this. But I think because things are changing so rapidly, a lot of tenure track professors also struggle with what kind of advice to give us, just because the scene, it's so different from when they started out. And in between that, you have to also throw in the AI and the pandemic. And so being a mentor, I mean, congrats. I think it's great that you have the program. But yeah, I would say for me, what would be the most useful is also just getting an opportunity to talk to people in a wide series of jobs, and just seeing how they use the skills that they gained to then get into a career that they find fulfilling. So it's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, really powerful, Adriana. I don't know if the panelists want to respond to that or.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that maybe one thing the mentorship program should think about is reaching out to people in those alt-act jobs as mentors too. So whoever reaches out to us, that we also look for that as someone that could be a mentor. Or we could try to showcase it if we did some kind of like more formal, like here are some mentors. If we were doing a like conference-based thing, to like find people who are in those careers who want to serve as mentors as well. I mean, I don't know, honestly, my job is a job, there's no bells, and it's just a job. And the thing that we liked, the research or the scholarly and creative work, that's either what I funnel into my teaching now, or it's what I try to do on my own time. It's my free labor, I guess, if I can find it. But I appreciate it. I feel very happy doing what I do. So I think if you can find the job that allows you to do that it doesn't have to be an academic job.
Yeah, and I love the idea of also valuing not just other career paths, but like the different kinds of labor. You've all showcased tonight, like there's different avenues of using humanities like expertise and those skill sets to branch out into other kinds of things, especially as it's not just academic research that is devalued that you have to do in your free time, but like also and grateful to Anthony for this as well with the regeneration, like the academic journals are also becoming fewer, I think. And yeah, there's just kind of a question also, who's reading this work, and and where is it going? Like I feel like a lot of that anti-hierarchical aspect of eco-criticism and ASLI maybe comes out of a deeper kind of activist, deeper stakes than just like making a career in academia. So I feel like in some ways, some of the work that you're doing, Alison and Ellie, like, reaching out beyond the walls of academia to different communities, that maybe that is like the kind of work we should be also thinking of valuing at ASLI more maybe, but also just in our own free labor that we do, to kind of value the important work we do. So I don't know, I don't want to ramble, but I do feel like there's a lot of kind of aspects where we could branch out into other ways of sharing the humanities and building the environmental humanities. So I'm just kind of curious, final thoughts from folks, because we are at time, about just tonight's discussion, or where you see the future of the environmental humanities, eco-criticism going now.
I'm sorry I joined late, everyone. It's been a very busy day, but I'm really grateful to be here. My name is Namaya, and I just got my master's in eco-criticism here in Glasgow. And I was also very much dissuaded from pursuing this field, and academia in general. And I'm obviously right out of school, and it's career options do seem bleak, but it's also been a bit of a wake-up call for me this year, seeing how many of my peers out of undergrad ended up in these kind of middling corporate jobs that had nothing to do with their areas of passion. And I think there's something bleak about that as well. And the community that I've found through ASLI and through my program is small, but I do feel that there's a really important role that the environmental humanities has to play. These questions that we get to ask, and kind of coming down to some really core humanist questions about how to deal with climate change, about how to have relationships with space, with each other. I just think there's so much exciting stuff here, intellectually and socially. And there's a small program, like community thing, that goes on in the town of Dumfries where I stay. It's called the Climate Kitchen, and it's just a once a month get together in town. And it's someone at the like surplus food gets cooked for a stew, and different folks just kind of do like impromptu little TED Talks. Sometimes people just pull up YouTube videos and just host conversations, and it's sort of like class. And it is free labor, but it is also free to everyone. And it's honestly been just like such a joy to be able to have these conversations with the town, on different topics each week or each month. So I guess I don't know if we have time to answer it, but I hope that you all have some spaces that you get to be that kind of person, prompting interesting questions and just bringing your research and your thoughts to your other relationships, at least in some capacity, some sort of informal capacity. Thanks.
Yeah, welcome, and thank you for your sharing there. Does anyone want to respond before we end?
I mean, I would just like to point out that there seems to be a pattern in some of our thinking about this, which also, right, was just talked about, which is that sometimes you wind up having a job that pays for the thing that you were originally trying to do, and then you do it, right? And there isn't a kind of reward structure built into the job, right? And I mean, in part, I am speaking for myself because my teaching basically pays for all the other stuff that I do. And that's not necessarily a problem. Like, I'm really lucky to be able to do that. And I agree with the idea that this should be brought into public. Like, I wish I could come to the Climate Kitchen. That sounds like so much fun. Um, and it's really what many of us want to do anyway. So to reverse that briefly, right, as well, right, say like we should get what we want to get done wherever we do it, right, and however it can be funded. The other thing is, I just want to say a little something as a journal editor that the problem is not that no one is reading our work, right, the formal academic work that gets published as articles, right? Like when we closed down Resilience, Resilience was a top performing journal in Project Muse at the University of Nebraska. Like thousands and thousands of people were reading those articles. So the problem is not audience, right? Like people totally want to hear this. It's just a matter of, I guess the delivery mechanism and who's going to keep it up and what kind of deliveries they're going to be and how many kinds of mechanisms are there. And how do you pay for it?
Yeah, that's a very important question at the end there as well. But yeah, it is yeah, I think people are hungry for this information and for our thoughts and yeah, to create networks of mentors as well that we can all support each other and yeah, and hear about these really cool projects like Climate Kitchen and maybe Alison will have some tips for us on these micro grants because that sounded really cool to draw in community based work and just make things happen. So it's really I'm very inspired. Now we are 10 minutes over, so I will close it there. Just I know folks have to move on with their busy lives. But thank you all so much for coming and sharing your time and for just sharing these inspiring stories. This was really incredible, and I look forward to just kind of thinking through this and maybe being in touch because I'm sure there will be follow-up questions. So thank you again. And then just in case anyone's interested, we will have one more speaker series event on the 1st of November on fundraising and union organizing for the precariously employed academics out there. So, so thank you all for coming and yeah, that's it.